The late afternoon sun streamed through the classroom windows, casting a golden beam across the worn wooden desk. James Wilson, 35 years old with a patient gaze, observed his students as they pored over their books of Ernest Hemingway. The public school in the Riverside district of Portland had peeling walls, but what it lacked in structure it made up for in dedication, especially that of James, the literature teacher who transformed each class into a journey through words. "Folks, notice how Hemingway plays with doubt. He doesn't give us easy answers," he said as he walked between the desks. "Life rarely gives us absolute certainties." Little did he know that his own words would be put to the test that very day. After class, James was gathering his materials when his phone rang. On the screen was a name that rarely appeared: Mom. Helen Wilson wasn't one to call without reason, especially on a Thursday afternoon. "Hello, Mom? Did something happen?" The voice on the other end hesitated. "James, my son, you need to come here. There's something you need to know, something I can't explain over the phone." James felt a tightness in his chest. The tremor in Helen's voice was unusual. "Are you okay? Is it something serious?" "I'm fine for now. But come as soon as you can. It's about our family, about things I've kept hidden for too long." James ran his hand through his dark hair, an automatic gesture when he became nervous. Pine Ridge was almost 3 hours from Portland. His life in the city was organized and predictable. Classes, the small apartment near the river, coffee at the bookstore on the corner, conversations with other teachers about authors and theories. "I'll get there Saturday early morning. Are you sure you can't tell me anything now?" "Just come," Helen replied, her voice breaking before hanging up. During the night, James tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. On his bedroom wall, old photographs showed his childhood in Pine Ridge. Him and Michael, his older brother, fishing in the Columbia River. Helen making quilts on the porch. His father, Anthony, fixing the old radio in the living room. Memories of a family that had gradually fallen apart. Michael had disappeared at 16, a wound that had never completely healed. Anthony had departed 3 years later, the victim of a massive heart attack, according to Helen. And then James, at 18, had moved to Portland to study, leaving his mother alone in the small town. The following morning, his students noticed the deep circles under his eyes. "Teacher, you look tired," commented Melissa, one of the most attentive students. "Just a bad night's sleep," he replied with a forced smile. "Today we're going to talk about For Whom the Bell Tolls." Hemingway said that the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. Why, in your opinion? While the students discussed, James's mind wandered. What did his mother need to tell him so urgently? Why now, after so many years of an almost monastic routine in Pine Ridge? At the end of class, Richard, the academic coordinator and longtime friend, noticed his discomfort. "Any problem, James? You seem worried." "I need to travel to Pine Ridge tomorrow. My mother, she called me yesterday, seemed upset." "Want me to cover your classes? I can rearrange the schedule." James accepted the offer with gratitude. Arriving home, he prepared a small suitcase, put some books in the trunk of his old Honda, and tried to sleep without success. At 4 in the morning, he gave up and set off for the countryside, with the first ray of sun rising on the horizon. The road that cut through the interior of Oregon was lonely at that hour. The asphalt, already punished by the relentless sun, reflected the heat that was beginning to intensify. James turned on the radio, but not even the old country songs could distract him from the weight of the anxiety he felt. "What do you have to tell me, Mom?" he muttered to himself as the car advanced toward his past and toward a future he could never have predicted. As he advanced along that lonely road, James felt the countryside invading his senses. The scenery gradually transformed. The green of the coastal forests gave way to drier landscapes, with their cacti and twisted bushes resisting the scarcity of water. The heat, even though it was still morning, was already punishing the inside of the car. James lowered the window and let the dry air of the countryside touch his face. With each mile traveled, memories of his childhood in Pine Ridge sprouted like rare flowers in that arid soil. He remembered swimming in the Columbia River, canoe rides, the stories of frontier outlaws that his father Anthony told on starry nights. Dad, he murmured, feeling the weight of the absence he had carried for more than 15 years. It was then that something unusual broke the monotony of the landscape. A golden spot stood out against the brown of the dry vegetation. James squinted, trying to make out what he was seeing. It was a dog, a golden retriever walking alone by the roadside, as if waiting for someone. The teacher reduced his speed, intrigued by the animal's presence in that isolated place. The retriever stopped, turned and looked directly at James as if it had recognized him. There was something strange in that look, an unusual intelligence that made James feel a shiver down his spine. On impulse, he pulled over and got out. The heat hit him like an invisible wall, making him shield his eyes with his hand. The dog remained motionless, watching him intently. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" called James, approaching cautiously. That's when he noticed the collar. It wasn't an ordinary collar. It seemed equipped with electronic devices, tiny lights that blinked at regular intervals, and a small antenna. James frowned, confused. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, crouching down to examine it better. The retriever allowed itself to be touched, but maintained that disturbing, almost human gaze. A small tag on the collar had an inscription in low relief, "Thunder Phoenix Project." "Thunder, is that your name, boy?" asked James, stroking the animal's head. As if understanding the question, the dog barked once and began to walk away from the road, stopping after a few meters to look back as if expecting James to follow. "Wait, where are you going? I can't leave you here, but I can't follow you either." "I have to get to Pine Ridge," said James, looking at his watch. He was ahead of schedule, but the uneasiness about his mother's phone call persisted. Thunder barked again, more insistently this time, and advanced a few more steps toward the interior of the dry landscape. "This is crazy," muttered James, wiping sweat from his forehead. But something about that dog, about that situation, seemed strangely connected to the urgency in Helen's tone. Reluctantly, James locked the car and began to follow the retriever. The terrain soon became irregular, with rocks and thorny vegetation, making the path difficult. After about 20 minutes of walking, Thunder stopped in front of a small stone construction, partially covered by vegetation, an abandoned cabin that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The wooden door, eaten, away by the years, was ajar. Thunder entered without hesitation, and James, driven by a curiosity stronger than prudence, followed the animal. The interior was dark and dusty. Beams of light entered through cracks in the roof, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air. James blinked several times until his eyes adapted to the dim light. The floor was packed earth, and there was little furniture, a broken table, an old chair, and in a corner a wooden chest. Thunder approached the chest and scratched the lid with his paw, looking at James as if asking him to open it. "What's in there, boy?" murmured James, kneeling beside the chest. The lid was secured by a rusty chain, but time had weakened the wood. With a strong pull, James managed to break it, raising a cloud of dust that made him cough. Inside the chest, partially, buried in the sand that had accumulated, was an old and faded teddy bear. James picked it up, feeling a strange recognition. The toy had a missing eye and patches on the seams, signs of an object much loved by a child. "This bear. I know this bear," he whispered, his heart racing. Before he could explore that sensation further, Thunder's collar emitted a high-pitched sound followed by a sequence of static. A distorted voice cut by interference emerged from the device. "Help, please. We are... danger..." The message was abruptly interrupted, leaving only the heavy silence of the cabin. James looked at Thunder, who kept his eyes fixed on him, as if waiting for a reaction. "Who's talking? Who needs help?" asked James, knowing he would not get an answer. With the teddy bear in one hand and the other caressing Thunder's head, James felt that he had crossed an invisible border. Something much bigger than he could imagine was unfolding, and somehow he was at the center of it. The noise of an engine in the distance awoke James from his trance. Instinctively, he put the teddy bear in his shirt pocket and quickly left the cabin with Thunder at his heels. As they approached the road, James saw a black pickup truck with tinted windows passing slowly, as if looking for something or someone. "Let's go, Thunder," he whispered, crouching behind a bush until the vehicle disappeared. Something about that pickup had made him uneasy. "We need to get to Pine Ridge." The return to the car was quicker, with James constantly looking over his shoulder. Thunder followed at his side like a silent guardian. Upon reaching the vehicle, James hesitated. "I can't leave you here, buddy." He opened the back door. "Come on, let's go." Surprisingly, the retriever entered without hesitation and settled on the seat as if it had done it before. James started the car and accelerated toward Pine Ridge, trying to organize his thoughts. The teddy bear in his pocket, the dog with the technological collar, the fragmented message, nothing made sense. But one thing he knew. It was all connected to his mother's urgent call. Pine Ridge appeared on the horizon as the sun began to set. The small historic town, known for its preserved architecture and the beauty of the Columbia River that surrounded it, seemed unchangeable over time. James felt that familiar mixture of nostalgia and apprehension that always accompanied him when returning to his origins. Helen's house was in the upper part of the town, a simple construction with white walls and blue windows, with a porch that overlooked the river. James parked in front and took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. Thunder, as if understanding the seriousness of the moment, remained quiet in the back seat. "Wait here, I'll come back for you," said James, before closing the car. Helen opened the door before he even rang the doorbell. At 63, she maintained. An erect posture and penetrating gaze, although her hair, once black like her son's, was completely white. She dressed with her usual simplicity, but there was something different about her countenance, a barely disguised tension. "My son," she said, hugging him with unusual strength. "Thank God you came." "Mom, what's going on? Your phone call left me worried." Helen looked over James's shoulder, as if checking if they were alone, and pulled him inside, locking the door with 2 turns of the key. "Come, we need to talk," she said, leading him to the kitchen at the back of the house. The solid wooden table, where James had spent so many meals of his childhood, was covered with papers, photos, and what appeared to be maps. An open laptop displayed a screen with codes that James did not understand. "Mum, what is all this?" he asked, confused. Helen sat down and indicated the chair across from her. Her eyes were loaded with a mixture of determination and fear. "James, what I'm going to tell you will change everything you believe about our family, about me and your father." She took a deep breath. "We are not who you think we are." A heavy silence settled, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. James felt his heart accelerate. "What are you talking about? Your father and I were never just the simple Pine Ridge residents you knew. We were part of an organization called Phoenix." Helen took a photograph from among the papers and showed it to James. In it, a group of people dressed in tactical uniforms posed in front of a helicopter. Among them, unmistakable, were Helen and Anthony, much younger. James looked at the photo, incredulous. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Phoenix was created to combat clandestine international human trafficking networks," continued Helen, ignoring the question. "We operated in the shadows, infiltrated, collecting information and rescuing victims." "Mom, this is absurd. You're a craftswoman. You've been making quilts for decades, and Dad was a mechanic. He fixed the fishermen's boats." "Those were our facades, James, carefully constructed identities." Helen stood up, heading to an apparently common cabinet on the wall. She pressed a specific point, and to James's amazement, a secret door opened, revealing a small room full of electronic equipment, weapons and uniforms, with the same symbol he had seen in the photo, a stylized phoenix in red and gold. "It's not possible," he muttered, getting up to see better. "Your father didn't suffer a heart attack, James. He's alive." The revelation hit James like a physical blow, making him stagger. For 15 years he had mourned the loss of his father, visited an empty grave, carried the grief. "This can't be. Why would you lie about something like that?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "To protect you and your brother. Anthony infiltrated deeply into a criminal organization known as Ghost. It was too dangerous to maintain contact. He had to disappear." James leaned against the wall, trying to assimilate what he was hearing. It was then that he remembered Thunder. "Wait a minute," he said, heading to the door. "There's something you need to see." Helen followed James to the car, eyebrows raised in a sign of curiosity. When he opened the back door and Thunder jumped out, the woman's expression changed instantly. A mixture of recognition, relief, and concern crossed her aged face. "Thunder!" she exclaimed, kneeling to hug the retriever that energetically wagged its tail. "How did you find him?" James crossed his arms, observing the scene with increasing perplexity. "He was on the road waiting for me, as if he knew I would come." Helen examined the animal's collar with technical attention, pressing some discreet buttons. The small red light blinked 3 times and went out. "The tracking system is damaged," she muttered, more to herself than to James. "But the communicator still works." "Mom," James interrupted, his voice loaded with impatience. "You know this dog? And what's on his collar? I heard a message asking for help." Helen stood up, looking around cautiously. "Let's go inside. It's not safe to talk out here." Back in the kitchen, with Thunder now lying at Helen's feet like an old friend finding his home again, James took the teddy bear from his pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this in an abandoned cabin. Thunder led me there." Helen's eyes widened. Her hands, marked by time and work, trembled slightly as she picked up the toy. "Teddy," she whispered, caressing the bear tenderly. "He was Michael's inseparable companion when he was a child." The mention of his missing brother made James feel a lump in his throat. The memories of Michael, 4 years older, were fragmented by time. The two fishing together, Michael teaching him to swim in the river, the nights when his brother read stories to help him sleep. How did his teddy bear end up in that cabin, and why did the dog lead me there? None of this makes sense, Mom. Helen took a deep breath, like someone preparing to dive into deep waters. "James, your brother didn't disappear as we told you. Michael was recruited by Phoenix at 16, following in our footsteps. He was brilliant, had a natural talent for codes and strategies. We agreed because we believed he would be safer under our supervision than exposed as a potential target." James felt the room spin. Each revelation seemed to dismantle a bit more of the reality he knew. "So Michael is alive, too? All this time you deceived me." "He was alive, yes, he may still be." Helen opened the laptop and typed a password. On the screen appeared the photo of a man of about 35, with a well-trimmed beard and intense dark eyes, despite the changes brought. By time, James instantly recognized his brother. "My God, Michael." He touched the screen as if he could reach his brother through the image. "Where is he? Why did he never contact me?" Helen's expression hardened. 7 years ago, Michael was sent to infiltrate Ghost, the same organization where your father was working undercover. The mission was to rescue him and obtain crucial information about an international operation. But something went wrong. She opened a drawer and removed a flash drive, inserting it into the laptop. Her series of encrypted emails and reports appeared on the screen. "We lost contact with Michael for 3 months. When we finally received news, it wasn't what we expected." Helen showed James a surveillance photo. In it, Michael was talking with a man in a suit in a luxurious restaurant. He had changed sides. Phoenix Intelligence confirmed Michael had become part of Ghost, no longer as an infiltrator, but as an active member. James felt his blood freeze in his veins. No, that can't be true. Michael wouldn't do that. At first we thought the same. There was the possibility it was a maneuver to gain their trust. But as the months passed, the evidence accumulated. Helen opened another file, showing photographs of Michael supervising what appeared to be a transfer of goods at a port. "Your brother became the right hand of Arthur Morgan, the leader of Ghost in the Northwest." Thunder suddenly stood up, ears alert. Helen made a gesture for James to be quiet and approached the window, peering discreetly through the curtains. "We're being watched," she whispered. "The black pickup you saw on the road. They followed you here." James joined his mother at the window. The same pickup with tinted windows was parked across the street, with the engine running. "Who are they?" "Ghost agents. And if they're here, it means they know about you, about our connection." Helen turned to her son, holding him by the shoulders, with surprising strength for a woman of her age. "James, you need to understand. I called you here not only to reveal the truth, but because we need your help. Anthony is in danger. We believe Michael is holding him hostage as a guarantee for his own safety within Ghost. James felt the weight of Helen's words as if they were made of lead. And what can I do? I'm just a literature teacher, not a secret agent. You are much more than that, son. You are the only person Michael might still listen to. The only one who can reach him, make him remember who he really is. Helen held James's face between her calloused hands. You are our last hope. The sound of car doors slamming cut through the tension of the moment. James and Helen moved away from the window, exchanging apprehensive looks. They can't find us here, whispered Helen, moving with the agility of someone who had spent a life in risky situations. Come on, there's an exit through the back. She picked up a small backpack from a cabinet, threw some documents inside, and stored the laptop. Then she took the teddy bear, Teddy, and handed it to James. Take it with you, it might be important. Thunder was already at the back door, as if perfectly understanding the gravity of the situation. Helen opened a disguised panel in the kitchen wall and typed a code. A small door camouflaged among the floorboards opened, revealing a narrow staircase. It will lead to the river. There's a boat waiting. Thunder knows the way. Follow him. James hesitated. And you? I'll distract them. Don't worry, it's not the first time I've dealt with Ghost. I won't leave you here alone. Helen held her son by the shoulders with that determined look that James knew well from childhood. James, you have 24 hours to decide if you want to help us or return to your life in Portland. I know it's a lot to process, but your father and possibly your brother depend on this choice. She looked at Thunder. The dog will stay with you. If you decide to help us, he will lead you to the meeting point. If not, leave him at one of the docks in Pine Ridge with the collar intact. He will know how to return. The sound of footsteps approaching the front door accelerated the farewell. Helen hugged her son tightly. I trust you, my son, I always have. Reluctantly, James descended the stairs with Thunder at his side. The passage led to a damp tunnel, illuminated only by small lights embedded in the floor. After about 200 meters, they reached an exit that led directly to a small dock hidden among bushes on the riverbank. A motorboat, small and discreet, was tied there. James and Thunder quickly boarded, and he started the engine, silently moving away from the shore. From where he was, he could see Helen's house on the hill and glimpsed shadows of people entering through the back. Mom, he murmured, feeling his heart tighten. Thunder barked softly, as if saying that Helen knew how to take care of herself. James nodded, steering the boat toward the more remote part of the Columbia River. After almost an hour of navigation, they reached a small fisherman's cabin, isolated among the trees on the shore. At the improvised dock, there was an old pickup truck with the key in the ignition and a note on the dashboard. For emergencies, phone password, Michael 1989. A prepaid cell phone was in the glove compartment, along with some money and fake documents in the name of Daniel Adams. James let out a bitter laugh. His family had planned everything, anticipating each move as in a chess game. Physically and emotionally exhausted, James entered the cabin. It was simple but clean, and stocked with canned food, water, and a made bed. Thunder settled on an old rug near the unlit fireplace, watching James with his intelligent eyes. James threw himself on the bed, staring at the wooden ceiling. In less than 24 hours, all of his reality had collapsed. His father, whom he believed to be resting eternally in the Pine Ridge Cemetery, was alive. His brother, whom he imagined had been the victim of some accident in the river, had become part of a criminal organization. And his mother, the quiet quilt maker, was actually a secret agent. What world have I been living in all these years? He muttered to himself, running his hands over his tired face. He took the teddy bear from his pocket and examined it in the dim light of the cabin. Teddy had been Michael's best friend throughout childhood. James remembered his brother carrying the toy everywhere, even when he was already too big for it. What could have happened to make Michael change so much? To abandon not only Phoenix, but also the principles his parents had taught him. The teacher stood up and went to the window, observing the river flowing calmly, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding on its banks. The full moon reflected on the dark water, creating a silver path on the surface. "What should I do, Thunder?" he asked, turning to the retriever that raised its ears upon hearing its name. "Return to my life in Portland and pretend none of this happened, or dive into this madness and try to save a family I barely know." The dog got up, approached James, and touched its muzzle to his hand as if offering comfort. The collar emitted a soft beep, and a blue light began to blink rhythmically. James took the cell phone and turned it on, entering the password Helen had provided. On the screen, a single file, a video. With his heart racing, he opened it. In the video, a man of about 60, grey hair and the same penetrating look as James, appeared on the screen. Despite the wrinkles that now marked his face, it was unmistakably Anthony Wilson. James felt the air leave his lungs. "Dad," he whispered, touching the screen as if he could reach him through it. "James, my son." Anthony's voice, deeper than James remembered, carried the characteristic accent of the Oregon countryside. "If you're watching this, it means Helen managed to contact you and that things went as we feared." Anthony looked to the side as if checking if he was alone and continued, "I don't have much time, so I'll be direct. Your parents are not who you thought they were your whole life. We've been Phoenix agents for over 30 years. Our biggest regret was involving Michael, in all of this without giving him a choice." He paused, running his hand over his tired face. "Now you have that choice, James, and whatever decision you make, know that we will respect it." James paused the video for a moment, needing to process what he was seeing and hearing. So many years believing that his father had passed away, so many tears shed before an empty grave. Part of him wanted to feel anger, but the predominant emotion was an overwhelming relief to know that Anthony was alive. He resumed the video. "The group I work for undercover, Ghost, is planning something big, something that could cause irreparable harm to countless innocent lives. I've managed to discover parts of the plan, but I can't get out of here to transmit this information to Phoenix. And the worst—" Anthony hesitated, his eyes tearing up. "Michael is involved. Your brother really has changed sides, son. He's no longer an infiltrator, he has become part of Ghost." James swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his father's words. "But I believe there is still hope. Michael always had a weakness: loyalty to family. That's why we need you, James. You are the only one who can reach him, the only one who isn't. Marked in his mind as a Phoenix agent, as someone who forced him onto this path." Anthony looked directly at the camera, his eyes, so similar to James's, conveying a silent plea. "Ghost's operation is scheduled to occur within 2 weeks, during the Pine Ridge Craft Festival. They plan to use the event as cover for a massive transfer. I need you to find Michael before that, not to capture him or confront him, but to remind him of who he really is." The video shook, and Anthony looked nervously over his shoulder. "Thunder is more than he seems. He's been trained not only to track people, but also to serve as a secure communication link. His collar contains technology developed by Phoenix, a communication system impossible to track. There's also a secret compartment where I've stored crucial information. You'll know how to access it when the time comes." The sound of footsteps seemed to approach in the video, and Anthony spoke more hastily. "If you decide to help us, Thunder, we'll lead you to Clara Martinez, our contact in Baker City. She'll give you the next steps. If you decide to return to your life, I'll understand, son. Just leave Thunder at the location Helen indicated." A noise of a door opening made Anthony look to the side. He turned one last time to the camera. "I love you, James, always have. I'm sorry I wasn't there to see the incredible man you've become. I hope to have the chance to make up for lost time." He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Oh, and as a child, you had a secret name for the two of us, remember? We used it when we played explorers in the backyard. That's the code for the compartment in Thunder's collar." The video ended abruptly. James remained still, looking at the black screen, silent tears running down his face. Thunder approached, resting his head on James's knee, as if understanding his pain. "Captain Lightning and Lieutenant Storm," murmured James, recalling the childhood games. "That's what we called ourselves." Thunder barked softly, as if confirming. James stood up, walking in circles around the small cabin, trying to organize his thoughts. Part of him, the literature teacher with a peaceful life, simply wanted to ignore all of this, return to Portland and resume his safe routine. But another part, perhaps the boy who had once dreamed of adventures alongside his father, knew he could not abandon his family now. He crouched beside Thunder and examined the collar more carefully. There was a small panel with almost imperceptible buttons. James pressed a sequence, lightning storm, translating the words to numbers on the telephone keypad, as he had learned from his father in their code games. A soft click was heard, and a tiny compartment opened in the collar. Inside it, a device the size of a memory card. James picked it up carefully and looked for a place to insert it in the cell phone. The device fit perfectly, and the phone screen immediately displayed a detailed map of the interior of Oregon, with a point blinking in the city of Baker City. "Clara Martinez," said James, looking at the map and then at Thunder. "Is that where we should go?" The retriever wagged its tail as if responding affirmatively. James ran his hand through the dog's golden fur, feeling a strange determination growing inside him. Maybe he was just a literature teacher, but he was also the son of Anthony and Helen Wilson, Michael's brother, and maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. He took the teddy bear Teddy and carefully stored it in the backpack he had found in the pickup. "Let's get some sleep, Thunder. Early tomorrow we leave for Baker City." The dog settled at the foot of the bed, vigilant. James lay down, knowing he wouldn't be able to sleep. His mind reviewed all the day's revelations, trying to stitch together a new version of his family history, a version where nothing was as it seemed, where secrets and lies mingled with love and sacrifice. Outside, the Columbia River followed its imperturbable course, the waters reflecting the full moon. Somewhere Michael was making choices that could change the destiny of many people. Somewhere Anthony waited, hoping that his youngest son could fix what had been broken. The sun had barely risen when James and Thunder left the cabin. The old pickup protested with a roar before coming to life, raising dust from the dirt road. The teacher adjusted the rearview mirror, observing the river that was left behind, a silver ribbon cutting through the green and brown landscape. "No." Turning back now, he muttered to himself, while Thunder, in the passenger seat, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The trip to Baker City, the second largest city in eastern Oregon, took almost 3 hours. James avoided the main highways, following secondary roads as indicated on the device's map. As he drove, his mind wandered between childhood memories and recent revelations. Who was Michael really? How could his brother, who played with him on the riverbanks, who taught him to fish, who cried in secret when he accidentally hurt a bird, have become part of a criminal organization? The city of Baker City appeared on the horizon, with its typical contrasts of a developing western interior. Modern buildings sharing space with houses of colonial architecture, open-air markets alongside shopping centers. Known as the Gold City for its historic gold production, the city had diversified economically in recent decades. The map on the cell phone guided him to the hillside neighborhood, an area further from the center. Finally, he stopped in front of a small craft shop called Quilts and Memories. A bell tinkled when James opened the door, with Thunder following him closely. The interior of the shop was a labyrinth of delicate quilts, colorful embroidery, and typical Western ceramic pieces. The aroma of dried herbs filled the environment, mixing with the smell of cotton and natural dyes. It seemed empty until a female voice sounded from behind a folding screen decorated with patchwork quilts. "We're closed for lunch. We'll be back at 2. "I'm looking for Clara Martinez," said James, feeling strange, as if he were repeating a password in a spy movie. "Thunder brought me here." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of light footsteps. A woman of approximately 50 appeared, dressed simply, but with a posture that emanated authority. Her grey hair was tied in an elegant bun, and her dark, perceptive eyes studied James for a moment before turning to Thunder. Helen managed to contact. "You," she said, not as a question but as a statement. Her gaze returned to James, evaluating him. "You have your father's eyes." James felt a lump in his throat. "You know my father? I've known Anthony for more than 20 years, and Michael too." She made a gesture for them to follow her. "Let's go to the back. It's not safe to talk here." They crossed the shop to a discreet door that led to a room in the back. Unlike the traditional environment of the shop, that space was ultra-modern, with sophisticated communication equipment, computer screens displaying maps and data, and a central table with scattered documents. "Welcome to Baker City's Phoenix nucleus," said Clara, closing the door. "It's not as impressive as the central base in Seattle, but it serves our purpose." James looked around, stunned by the contrast. How many craft shops are actually secret Phoenix bases? Clara smiled for the first time, revealing lines of expression that softened her face. "More than you can imagine. Quilts, ceramics, crafts in general. They're perfect facades. They allow constant travel to search for materials, justify meetings with diverse people, and nobody questions a middle-aged craftswoman who lives alone." She approached one of the screens and typed a code. An image appeared. Helen, somewhere. James didn't recognize. "Your mother is safe," informed Clara. "She managed to throw off the ghost agents in Pine Ridge and is now in one of our shelters in Hood River." Relief flooded James. "Thank you for telling me that." Clara nodded and turned to Thunder, who had sat patiently beside James. She took a small device from her pocket and brought it close to the dog's collar. Green lights blinked and a panel opened. "You accessed the secret compartment," she observed, examining the collar. "And it seems you saw Anthony's message." "I did," confirmed. "James, I'm still trying to process all of this. My father alive, my brother working for criminals. It seems like a nightmare or a bad spy movie." "I understand it's difficult." Clara pointed to a chair, inviting him to sit down. "But we need your help, James. The operation that Ghost is planning for the craft festival is not just another criminal scheme." She touched another screen, and a map of the Northwest region appeared with red points marking various locations. Ghost has built a human trafficking network that extends throughout the Northwest, with international ramifications. They use cultural events as cover for their operations. The Pine Ridge Craft Festival, which attracts tourists and buyers from all over the country, will be used for a massive transfer of people. James felt his stomach turn. "And my brother is involved in this?" Clara hesitated before answering. "Michael started as an infiltrator, but something changed in recent years. He became responsible for the logistics of Ghost operations. His knowledge of Phoenix protocols made it almost impossible for us to intercept them." She approached James, her gaze softening. "However, Anthony believes, and I agree, that your brother is not completely lost. There are signs that he is protecting your father within the organization, putting himself at risk to do so." "What exactly do you expect me to do?" asked James, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. "We want you to find Michael before the festival, not as a Phoenix agent, but as a brother." Clara placed her hand on his shoulder. "We have information that he will be in Hood River tomorrow, supervising the preparations for the transport they will use during the festival. It's a rare opportunity to reach him without the presence of other Ghost members." Thunder stood up and approached one of the screens, as if understanding the conversation. Clara smiled at the dog and then at James. "Thunder will take you there. He knows Michael, was trained to track him in any situation." James looked at the golden retriever, still trying to understand the level of training and technology involved. "And if Michael doesn't want to listen to me, and if he has really changed so much that he no longer cares about family?" Clara took something from a drawer and handed it to James, an old photo showing the two brothers, still children, sitting on the riverbank with Teddy between them. "That's why you'll also take this." She handed him a package wrapped in fabric. James opened it, revealing a small book with a worn leather cover. "The Little Prince," he murmured, recognizing the copy. "It was Michael's favorite book. I used to read to him even after he already knew how to read. It was our ritual." "Exactly," confirmed Clara. "Don't underestimate the power of childhood memories, James. They can be the only bridge to reach someone who has lost their way." The historic town of Hood River, on the banks of the Columbia River, maintained a colonial air that seemed to transport its visitors to another era. The cobblestone streets, the old churches and the colorful houses created a unique atmosphere, making it difficult to believe that under that peaceful appearance there could be any criminal activity. James parked the pickup near the port as Clara had instructed. The movement of small vessels, fishermen and tourists offered the perfect anonymity. Thunder, equipped with an apparently common collar, Clara had camouflaged the electronic devices to avoid drawing attention, followed attentively at James's side. "We're looking for my brother, Thunder," murmured James, feeling strange talking to a dog as if it understood every word. "Can you find him?" In response, the retriever began to walk purposefully toward the historic center. James followed, carrying a backpack where he had stored the teddy bear Teddy, the book The Little Prince, and some other items that Clara had given him, including a small tracking device and a communicator disguised as a Bluetooth earpiece. "The signal is clear," came Clara's voice through the earpiece. "According to our information, Michael should be supervising the arrival of a shipment at the ferry port. It's a less busy area, about 500 meters from where you are." James adjusted his sunglasses, also equipped with technology, allowing Clara to see what he saw. "Understood," he responded softly, trying not to look like a crazy person talking to himself on the street. Thunder suddenly changed direction, leaving the main street and entering a narrow alley that descended toward the river. James followed, feeling his heart accelerate with each step. The idea of reuniting with Michael after so many years, under such circumstances, left him in a state of almost paralyzing nervousness. Upon reaching the end of the alley, Thunder stopped. Ahead of them, a small, less bustling port area extended, with some old warehouses and docks for small vessels. The retriever remained motionless, ears erect completely, focused on a group of men who were talking near a covered ferry docked at the quay. "I see the group," whispered James to Clara. "5 men, one with his back to me seems to be the one in command." "Can you identify Michael?" asked Clara through the communicator. James observed attentively and then felt his stomach sink. The man with his back turned partially, revealing a profile that, despite the years and changes, was unmistakable. "It's him," confirmed James, his voice trembling. "What should I do now?" "Wait for him to move away from the group. We can't risk an approach with the others present." Thunder seemed to understand the situation, keeping hidden at James's side behind some stacked wooden crates. For almost half an hour, they observed the movement. Michael seemed to be supervising the unloading of some large boxes from the ferry to a van parked near the dock. Finally, Michael made a gesture to the men and moved away, walking toward a small cafe on the waterfront. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "He's alone now, going to that cafe," informed James. "I'm going to approach him." "Be careful," warned Clara. "Remember that he's not the Michael you knew. Be prudent." James silently nodded, and with Thunder at his side, walked toward the cafe. Michael had sat at an outdoor table with his back to the street, overlooking the river. He was fiddling with a cell phone, apparently concentrated. Taking a deep breath to contain the tremor he felt in his hands, James approached. Thunder, surprisingly, stayed a few steps behind, as if understanding that this moment was just for the two brothers. "Michael?" The man froze upon hearing his name, but didn't turn immediately. When he finally did, his face expressed a mixture of shock and something James couldn't define. Was it fear? "James." Michael's voice was deeper than James remembered, but carried the same familiar intonation. "What are you doing here?" Ignoring the uneven beats of his heart, James pulled a chair and sat across from his brother. "We need to talk. About Dad, about Mom, about you." Michael's face hardened, his eyes, so similar to James's, becoming cold. "There's nothing for us to talk about. You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "For whom? For me or for you?" James leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I know everything, Michael. About Phoenix, about Ghost, about what you've become." Michael quickly looked around, checking if anyone was watching them. "You don't know anything, little brother. Go away while you can." It was then that Thunder approached, positioning himself at James's side. Michael's eyes widened in recognition. "Thunder," he extended his hand hesitantly to the dog, who sniffed his fingers and wagged his tail slightly, recognizing him. "He guided me to you," said James, taking advantage of his brother's momentary vulnerability. Just as he led me to this, he took the worn teddy bear from his backpack and placed it on the table. Michael looked at Teddy with an expression that mixed surprise and deep pain. His hands, which James noticed had various small scars, touched the toy hesitantly. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice suddenly softer. "In an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. Why was it there, Michael? What happened to you? Why are you involved with people like these?" Michael withdrew his hand from the teddy bear as if he had been burned, and his face returned to its mask of coldness. "You wouldn't understand, James. You never would. Our family is not what you think." "I know," replied James, keeping his eyes fixed on his brothers. "I know about Mom and Dad, about Phoenix. I know you started as one of them. What I don't know is how you transformed into this." A flash of vulnerability crossed Michael's face, so fast that James almost didn't notice. The older brother stood up abruptly. "I need to go. Forget you saw me. Return to your teacher's life in Portland and stay away from all this." James also stood up, holding Michael's arm. "Our father is alive. He needs your help. Our help." Michael removed James's hand firmly but without violence. "Dad is fine. I'm ensuring that." A bitter smile formed on his lips. "It's the most I can do now." "It's not enough, Michael. Ghost is planning something big for the craft festival, something that will hurt many people. Do you really want to be part of that?" Michael's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about the festival?" "I have my contacts," replied James, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Michael gave a short laugh without humor. "Clara Martinez, always meddling." He looked at Thunder and then back at James. "I have to go now, but we'll meet again, little brother. And when that happens, you'll have to choose a side." He quickly moved away, but before disappearing among the port buildings, he turned one last time. "Keep Teddy safe. He's seen too much already." James remained standing, watching his brother leave with a feeling of helplessness and confusion. Thunder touched his muzzle to James's hand, as if offering consolation. "He's gone," said James to Clara through the communicator. "But I don't think it was a complete failure. There's something happening there, something Michael isn't telling me." "Return to the meeting point," instructed Clara. "You've planted the seed. Now we need to see if it will germinate." Thunder barked softly, as if agreeing, and James, with the teddy bear stored again in his backpack, followed the way back, feeling that he had crossed a point of no return. The improvised Phoenix base on the outskirts of Hood River was bustling with activity. Clara and her team monitored communications, analyzed maps, and discussed strategies. James, sitting in a corner with Thunder at his side, observed everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. In less than a week, his life had transformed into something unrecognizable. "Your meeting with Michael had repercussions," said Clara, approaching with a cup of coffee that she offered to James. "We detected an increase in Ghost's encrypted communications in the last few hours." "Is that good or bad?" asked James, accepting the coffee. "Both. It means you affected him, which was our goal. But it also means they may be altering their plans, which complicates our operation." Helen, who had arrived at the base that morning, joined them. Despite the circumstances, James felt a strange comfort in his mother's presence. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, so many years of secrets to unravel, but the moment demanded focus on more urgent matters. "Michael was always the more sensitive of you two," commented Helen, sitting beside her son. "Behind that tough guy posture, he cared deeply about people. That's what Ghost used against him." James frowned. "What do you mean?" Helen exchanged a look with Clara, who nodded slightly. "When Michael was sent to infiltrate Ghost, the mission was to rescue your father and destroy the human trafficking operation they were building," explained Helen. "But he discovered something we didn't expect. Ghost had developed a method to blackmail Phoenix agents by threatening their families." "Michael was caught between a rock and a hard place," continued Clara. "If he maintained his cover and helped us, innocent people would be harmed. If he really joined Ghost, he could protect these people, including your father." James felt a lump in his throat. "So he didn't really betray you. He's trying to protect the victims." "That's what we believe," replied Helen. "But over time, The lines become blurred. Michael had to do terrible things to maintain his position in Ghost, things that may have fundamentally changed who he is. The silence that followed was heavy. James tried to assimilate the complexity of his brother's situation. It wasn't a simple matter of good versus evil, but a tangle of impossible choices and painful sacrifices. "What happens now?" he finally asked. Clara stood up and led him to a large table in the center of the room, where a detailed map of Pine Ridge was spread out with markings at various points. "The craft festival begins in 3 days. According to our information, Ghost plans to use the event as cover for a large trafficking operation." She pointed to a highlighted area on the map. "The victims will be transported disguised as tourists in boats along the river with fake documentation." "And where does my father fit into this?" "We believe Anthony is being held here." Helen indicated a point away from the town. "An isolated farm that belongs to one of Ghost's leaders. Security is heavy. We can't simply invade it without putting his life and the lives of possible victims there at risk." James felt the weight of the situation fall on his shoulders. "And what do you expect me to do?" "Michael trusts you," replied Clara. "Or at least, he trusts you more than any of us. We need you to find him again, to convince him to help us." "How?" "He made it clear he doesn't want to get involved with me." Helen placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "There's something we haven't told you yet." She took a small shining object from her pocket and placed it on the table, a pendant in the shape of an open book made of silver. "This necklace belonged to your grandfather, who gave it to Michael on his 10th birthday. Your brother never took it off until the day he disappeared. It was like a talisman for him." James picked up the small pendant, remembering seeing it on his brother's neck throughout his childhood. "How did you get it?" "Michael left it behind when he was recruited for Phoenix. He said he didn't want to risk losing it in the field. It was his most valuable possession." An idea began to form in James's mind. "You want me to use this to lure him?" Clara shook her head. "Not as a trap, but as a reminder of who he really is, of what he really values." James put the pendant in his pocket, thoughtful. "And how will I find him again? I doubt he'll go to the same cafe waiting for me." Clara smiled for the first time since they had returned to Hood River. "That's why we implanted a tracker in his jacket during your meeting." "You did what?" James looked at her, incredulous. "Thunder didn't approach him just out of recognition," explained Clara. "His collar contains micro-devices that can be transferred by contact. When Thunder touched him, the tracker was implanted in his jacket." James looked at the retriever, who seemed strangely proud. "You guys are scary, you know that?" Helen laughed softly. "Welcome to the real world of espionage, son. Nothing like in the movies." A young agent, whom James hadn't noticed before, approached Clara hastily. "We have movement," he announced. "The tracker indicates that Michael is moving to Cascade Locks, the riverside town on the way to the mouth of the Columbia." Clara looked at James. "It's now. You need to go after him, alone. Any of us would be recognized immediately." James felt fear and adrenaline mix in his blood. He was about to confront his brother again, this time with even more at stake. Thunder stood up as if ready to accompany him. "No, buddy," said Clara, stroking the dog's head. "This time James needs to go alone. You're already known to Ghost. It would be too risky." The retriever let out a small whimper of protest, but sat down again. James crouched, hugging the animal that had become his partner in this unlikely journey. "I'll miss you, Thunder. Take care of Mom for me." He stood up, facing Clara and Helen with renewed determination. "Give me the coordinates, and any equipment I might need. I'll bring Michael back one way or another." While the team prepared what was necessary for his mission, James took from his backpack the small worn book that Clara had given him in Baker City, The Little Prince. He leafed through it distractedly, stopping at a page where a passage was underlined. "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed." James closed the book, feeling a resolution forming inside him. Michael had tamed people who now depended on him for their survival. And he, James, had been tamed by this mission, by his rediscovered family, by the secrets unveiled. There was no turning back. Cascade Locks, situated near the mouth of the Columbia River, was a small town that lived mainly from fishing and tourism. The colorful boats gently rocked in the waters of the Columbia, while the afternoon sun tinged the horizon golden. James, driving a boat borrowed from Phoenix, followed the coordinates provided by the tracker implanted in Michael's jacket. The signal had led him to an area away from the town, where the river began to open to meet the sea. There, amid a small mangrove forest, was an almost imperceptible construction among the vegetation, a stilted house, typical of riverside regions, but large enough to serve as an operation point. James docked the boat at a safe distance and proceeded on foot, taking care not to be seen. The years as a teacher in the city had poorly prepared him for walking stealthily in a wetland, but the basic instructions from Clara and the equipment provided by Phoenix helped him move with relative discretion. As he approached the house, he heard voices. Crouching behind some trees, he could see through the open window that there were at least 3 people inside: Michael and 2 men he didn't recognize. They seemed to be arguing intensely. "This is not what we agreed on, Arthur," Michael was saying, confronting a burly, middle-aged man whose face had a scar that crossed from his left temple to his chin. The deal was to transfer only goods, not people. "Plans have changed," replied the man called Arthur with a calm but intimidating voice. "The craft festival is a perfect opportunity. The town will be crowded, law enforcement will be busy with tourists. We can't waste this chance." "It's too risky," insisted Michael. "After what happened in Astoria last year, the FBI will be alert. Not to mention Phoenix, who is certainly already on our tail." Arthur smiled coldly. "Phoenix? I'm counting on them." He walked to a table where a laptop displayed images of several people. James recognized Clara, Helen, and other agents he had met at the base. "We are monitoring their every move, and we have our ace in the hole." He gave a signal to the 3rd man, who opened a side door. James had to contain a scream when he saw who entered the room. Anthony Wilson, his father, visibly weakened, but still maintaining a dignified posture. "Dad," whispered James, feeling his heart accelerate. "See, Michael, your father has cooperated marvelously all these years. He was an exemplary infiltrator for Phoenix, providing us with valuable information, without us ever suspecting, until we realized that some crucial information never reached Ghost." Arthur patted Anthony's shoulder, who remained impassive. "But now he will serve a better purpose. He will be the perfect bait to attract Phoenix into our trap during the festival." Michael looked at his father, and James could see, even from a distance, a silent exchange of communication between them. "And if I refuse to participate?" asked Michael, his voice tense. Arthur laughed. "You know what happens to those who try to leave Ghost, and it wouldn't be just you suffering the consequences." He picked up a tablet and showed it to Michael. "Your little brother, the teacher, would be the first on the list. By the way, how was your reunion? Touching, I imagine." James felt a chill. They knew about his meeting with Michael in Hood River. Maybe they even knew he was there now, watching them. As if confirming his fear, Arthur looked directly at the window where James was hiding. "In fact, why don't we ask him personally? James, why don't you join us?" Caught by surprise, James froze. Before he could react, he felt strong hands grabbing him. 2 men dragged him into the house, throwing him at Arthur's feet. "James!" Anthony took a step forward but was restrained. Michael looked at his brother with an expression that mixed surprise and something James couldn't define. Was it concern? Or anger that he had complicated the situation even more? "What a lovely family reunion," mocked Arthur. "The Wilsons finally reunited. Too bad the matriarch is missing, but don't worry, Helen will join you soon, one way or another." James stood up, facing Arthur. "You'll never succeed. Phoenix knows I'm here. They tracked my every step." Arthur laughed. "Really? Then why haven't they arrived yet?" He took something from James's pocket, the tracking device Clara had given him. "Basic technology. We intercepted the signal as soon as you entered the perimeter. They think you're still in the boat, circling downriver." Michael stepped forward. "Let him go, Arthur. He has nothing to do with this. He's just a teacher." "Too late," replied Arthur. "Actually, he arrived just in time to participate in our little demonstration." He made a gesture, and one of the men left the room, returning moments later with a group of people, 4 young women and 2 teenagers, all with expressions of terror on their faces. James looked horrified at those people clearly being held against their will. It was real, then, the human trafficking that Clara and Helen had mentioned. "These are just some of the products that will be transported during the festival," explained Arthur casually. "There are dozens of others at various points along the river, waiting for the right moment." "You're a monster," said James, unable to contain his disgust. Arthur shrugged. "I'm a businessman, and now, thanks to you, we have even more leverage over your brother." He turned to Michael. "The choice is yours. Fully cooperate with the festival operation or say goodbye to your family." Michael's gaze slowly traveled from Anthony to James, and then to the frightened victims. James could almost see the gears turning in his brother's mind, evaluating options, calculating risks. It was then that James felt something in his pocket, the book-shaped pendant that Helen had given him. A risky idea formed in his mind. "Michael," he called, catching his brother's eye, "remember what the little prince said? You become responsible forever for what you have tamed." A flash of recognition shone in Michael's eyes. James slowly brought his hand to his pocket, letting his brother see the silver gleam of the pendant. Michael looked at his father, then at the victims, and finally back at James. Something changed in his countenance, a resolution, a decision made. "You're right, Arthur," said Michael, surprisingly calm. "We don't have a choice. I'll cooperate." He approached Arthur, extending his hand as if to seal the deal. Arthur smiled triumphantly and shook the offered hand. What happened next was so fast that James could barely follow. Michael, in a fluid movement, pulled Arthur close and with his other hand hit a specific point on the man's neck, who immediately fell unconscious. The other men reacted, but Michael was faster. Years of Phoenix training showed their worth as he took down 2 of them with precise blows. Anthony, though weakened, joined the fight, neutralizing another henchman with a technique that James would never have imagined seeing a man of his age execute. James, recovering from the surprise, ran to the victims and began to untie them. "Come on, we need to get out of here fast." "We don't have much time," warned Michael, picking up Arthur's cell phone. "As soon as they discover we've lost contact, they'll send reinforcements." "Michael, you," began James, trying to process what he had just witnessed. "Later, little brother," cut Michael. "Now we need to get these people out of here and warn Phoenix about the festival operation." "Anthony," approached James, his eyes moist with emotion. For a moment, father and son looked at each other in silence. 15 years of absence condensed in that instant. "My son," said Anthony finally, embracing James with strength. "You've grown so much." "Dad," was all James could say. His voice choked. Michael interrupted the moment. "Sentimentalities later. We need to move." They led the victims to James's boat, which fortunately was large enough for everyone. Michael took command, navigating skillfully through the wetland channels, while James and Anthony reassured the rescued people. "You were never really on their side, were you?" asked James to his brother when they managed a moment alone. Michael looked at the water sliding under the boat before answering. "In the beginning, no, it was just an infiltration mission. But over time, things got complicated. Ghost discovered about Dad, threatened to kill him if I didn't truly cooperate. So I had to make difficult choices. You could have asked Phoenix for help and risk Dad's life, other innocent people." Michael shook his head. "No, I had to play their game, gain their trust, protect who I could behind the scenes. It was a thin line between collaborating and sabotaging." James took the pendant from his pocket and handed it to his brother. "Helen believed you were still in there somewhere." Michael took the small silver book, running his finger over the worn surface. "Some things anchor us no matter how much we stray." He looked at his father, who was consoling one of the young rescued women. "He never lost faith in me, even when I had already lost it myself." The boat navigated quickly, leaving the house in the wetland behind. Through the communicator he had recovered, Michael contacted Clara, providing details about the operation. "Planned for the festival. We'll need a large team," he said. "There are at least 3 entry points to the town and dozens of victims in transit. Arthur is not the only ghost leader involved." Clara's voice sounded relieved to realize that Michael was actually helping. We're mobilizing all our units in the Northwest. The FBI has also been alerted without revealing our participation, of course. When they reached Cascade Locks, a Phoenix team was already waiting to receive the rescued victims and take them to a safe location. Among the agents, to James's surprise and joy, was Thunder, who ran to greet them, wagging his tail frantically. "That dog never accepts being left behind," commented Clara, approaching the group. Helen appeared right behind her, and the Wilson family finally reunited after 15 years separated by secrets, lies, and undercover missions. "Michael," Helen embraced her oldest son, tears flowing freely down her face marked by time and worries. "My son." Michael, who had maintained his composure until then, finally let the mask of hardness fall. In his mother's arms, he returned to being the boy James had known in childhood, sensitive, protective, loyal. Clara gave the group a moment of privacy before approaching again. "We need to prepare. The festival starts tomorrow and Ghost still doesn't know they've lost their infiltrators." "We have the advantage of surprise," agreed Michael, recovering his professional posture. "But they're smart and have resources. We can't underestimate them." In the days that followed, the Wilson family worked alongside Phoenix in the operation that would interrupt Ghost's activities in the Northwest. James, even without formal training, contributed with his knowledge of the region and his ability to pass unnoticed as a simple local teacher. When the craft festival finally arrived, the town of Pine Ridge was full of tourists, craftsmen, and, secretly, Phoenix agents strategically positioned. The Ghost members, confident in their plan, didn't notice the trap until it was too late. The operation was a resounding success. Dozens of victims were rescued, and several Ghost leaders, including Arthur, were captured. The human trafficking network they had built over years was dismantled, although everyone knew that the fight against this type of crime never really ended. 3 months later, James was back in the classroom in Portland. His students noticed a change in their teacher. There was a new intensity in his gaze, a liveliness that hadn't been present before. No one knew what had happened during that month when he had taken leave for family matters, and James preferred to keep it that way. At the end of class, as he arranged his books, he heard a familiar bark. Thunder, wearing a common collar without electronic devices, was waiting for him at the door. "He insisted on coming to get you," said Helen, appearing right behind the dog. "Says it's family lunchtime." James smiled. Sunday lunches had become a restored tradition. In the house that Helen now maintained in Portland, he, his parents, Michael, and of course Thunder, gathered weekly. Michael had decided to continue with Phoenix, but now officially, without covers or false identities. Anthony, after so many years of undercover work, had finally retired, dedicating himself to fixing small boats at the Portland port, this time as a genuine hobby. James picked up his briefcase and accompanied his mother to the car, where Anthony and Michael were waiting for them. Thunder jumped into the back seat, settling comfortably between James and Michael. "How was class, Professor?" asked Michael, the slightly provocative tone of the older brother that James had known in childhood. "Great. We're studying Ernest Hemingway. The Old Man and the Sea, stories of fishermen, myths of the sea, secrets and redemptions." Michael smiled, the book-shaped pendant shining on his neck. "Seems appropriate for us, doesn't it?" The car followed the avenue that bordered the Portland riverfront, the blue-green water extending to the horizon. The Wilson family, finally reunited, moved forward, carrying their scars but also their victories, their secrets, and above all, the love that had survived all storms. James looked out the window, observing the river flowing. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the Columbia River met the ocean, just as his simple teacher's life had met the extraordinary legacy of his family. And like the mighty Columbia, which crossed obstacles and transformed landscapes, he too had found his way through the unexpected currents of life.